Now, given that most people will recognise this car as an Austin Allegro, let's get all the cliches out of the way first. Quartic wheel, doesn't have one. Rear window pops up when you jack it up. Not going to happen on this. Rust like crazy. This one isn't. All aggro. Been fine today. Now that we've done that, can we get started? This car, of course, isn't actually Allegro. This is a Vanden Plas, the posh version. But is the criticism of any Allegro, or indeed the posh version, fair? Let's take it for a drive to find out.
But first, our friends at Lancaster Insurance are running monthly giveaways. You can win all sorts, from experience days to tools, restaurant vouchers and tech. So click the link below at the end of the video to enter their latest competition.
So as I said, it's the Posh Allegro, but it was never officially badged as an Allegro. It's a Vanden Plas. Now, I think that's the correct pronunciation. There's quite a lot of debate over it, but Vanden Plas originates from the Flemish speaking part of Belgium, so pronouncing the S should be correct. I was probably yesterday years old when I stopped calling it Vanden Plas. So who were Vanden Plas? Well, they started out in Belgium in the late 19th century as a coach builder before an English subsidiary was set up in 1913, just before the war. After about 10 years they went into receivership, so the company was relaunched and moved to nearby Kingsbury in North London. They started building bodies for Alvis, Bentley, really prestigious marques. Sadly, after the Second World War, demand slumped again. So in 1946, Vanden Plas was bought by Austin to basically make bodies for its big 6-cylinder cars, which became known as the Princess range. Now in the 60s, the range comprised of the 4-litre limousine, the 3-litre and its 4-litre R replacement, and for a bit of badge engineering, the ADO 16 1100. Now that was a range up until the late 60s, when BMC, who'd acquired Jaguar and Daimler, were earmarked to assemble and trim the DS 420 limousine. And at the same time, the 4-litre R and the 4-litre limousine were discontinued. But the ADO 16 Princess, by now the 1300, was still selling really well. So when the Allegro came out in 1974 to replace the ADO 16, it made sense that they make a Vanden Plas version. There's all sorts of chat about how the Allegro should have looked, with Harris Mann's sleek sketches basically diluted by the fact they had to put the tall E-Series engine in, which meant a low-slung bonnet was a no-no. The Allegro ended up looking a little bit dumpier than it should. But even so, it had a big grille on the front, and it got all the refinements that the ADO 16 had. Walnut, leather, Wilton carpets, and those picnic tables. And this one, you can hear the clock ticking nicely. Just like a Rolls Royce. It was initially known as the Vanden Plas 1500, so the 1.5 E-Series engine with a 5-speed gearbox, which was quite a thing at the time, or an automatic. I suppose it was kind of aimed at the people that once drove a Jag or a Daimler and maybe retired, kept the luxury, but in a much smaller and easier to manage package. And the car continued through Series 2 guys to Series 3 in 1979. At that point, the Allegro 3 was launched with plastic bumpers, black trim, but the Vanden Plas kept all its nice chrome work with the exception of the door mirrors, which kind of seem a bit of an anomaly. But at that point, the 1750 engine was introduced as well, so the brand became the 1.5 or the 1.7. 1979 also saw the end of the Kingsbury works, but it didn't see the end of the Vanden Plas. These cars continued to be assembled at the MG plant in Abingdon until that closed a year later in 1980, and that was unfortunately the end of Vanden Plas as a marque in its own right. The name wasn't completely dead, it still appeared on Jags and Daimlers, and Austin Rover began introducing it as a trim level, like it had been in the past, on its other models, the Ambassador, the Metro, the Maestro, the Montego, and for the first time Rovers on the SD1 and the SD3 ranges. It lasted until the end of the SD3 in 1989, although it did make a brief comeback in 2002 on the Rover 75. So what of this car? Well, it drives quite well. Yes, it's not quite as refined as a contemporary Daimler, shall we say, but the box is quite smooth, it gets along all right. I'm familiar with all the switchgear from a Mini, which I'm not sure is a good or a bad thing, but the Hydra gas suspension, which was launched with this car, nice and comfortable. I think these got a bit of an unfair reputation. You have to remember that In 1974, Volkswagen had just launched its Golf with a hatchback, and well, if this had been a hatchback, it might have fared a little bit better. They still sold quite well during the 70s. Around 11,000 Vanden Plas versions were built, but that was only around a quarter of how the previous ADO 16 did. Of course, the Vanden Plas version got a bit of a hard time for its dumpy looks because the grille's a bit, well, it dominates the front end. And the idea of a Posh Allegro was probably quite amusing to some, but let's view it now. It's a rare car, it's interesting, and it's affordable. For that reason, I quite like it. It's no ball of fire, even with the 1750, but, well, it's endearing. It's certainly not anywhere near as bad as some of those unfair myths or crap car books would have you believe. So what did you have at the time? You had the Ford Escort Mark II, well, they're expensive. Citroen GS, which I love, but again, disappearing. The Hillman Avenger, okay, good car, perhaps not as interesting as this. And the Alfasud, which was great, but rusted away. In that company, the Vanden Plas, it stood alone. I've just got to remember not to call it an Allegro.
This video is proudly sponsored by Lancaster Insurance. Give them a call on 01480 400 889 for an insurance quote on your classic car. And don't forget to click the link below to enter their latest competition.